chose these specific eggs because I like the look of the orange and black Medaka, but Medaka come in a wide range of colours. Unfortunately, it is out of breeding season for Medaka right now here in the UK, so it can be difficult to find eggs, but next spring and summer there should be plenty available online. The package I got included some Medaka food, the actual eggs, a pipette to transfer the eggs between containers, and some easy to follow instructions which I combined with my own research. So moving on to the initial setup of this system, I chose this corner of the kitchen for the project because it gets direct sunlight for around 8 hours per day, and I've seen multiple sources say that Medaka do better in direct sunlight, especially Medaka fry. I filled the sauce trays with warm water, which was around 79 degrees Fahrenheit or 26 degrees Celsius, and I added the heaters to maintain the temperature. I also used a tap water conditioner product, but I have seen some Japanese breeders leave the chlorine in the water when hatching Medaka eggs because the chlorine can help prevent fungal growth. You can see the eggs at the bottom of this test tube along with 2 small water fleas, but they're not harmful. The water is tinted blue because the breeder added some methylene blue to reduce the risk of fungal issues developing during the shipping process. At that time I didn't actually have any methylene blue of my own, but if you do, you can add a few drops to your hatching container with the eggs to help reduce the risks of fungal infection. So I poured the eggs from the test tube into the hatching container to get started. The methylene blue gave the eggs a blue tint which made them a lot easier to count, and I noticed that the breeder had actually sent me 21 eggs even though I only ordered 15. Female Medaka naturally produce a stringy filament that helps them attach the eggs to different plants in the wild, and this can cause eggs to clump when done in captivity. I decided to separate the clumped eggs to try and reduce the risk of infection spreading if one of them were to develop an issue. I've seen other Medaka keepers say that fertilised Medaka eggs are surprisingly tough, so I just chose to use my fingertips to gently roll the eggs against the side of the container. It's surprising how resilient the eggs are, and you can easily use your fingertip sensitivity to control the amount of pressure you apply to the eggs to avoid damaging them. After a few minutes I managed to separate all of the eggs to lower the chances of any mass infection. So I just want to give a quick overview of my initial plan for the hatching stage of the project. I set up 3 containers, 1 for the eggs, 1 for the fry and 1 spare. This setup allows me to easily perform 100% water changes as required by rotating the containers. For example, I would move the eggs to the spare container and then clean and refill the old egg container with fresh water. Any fry that I had would then be transferred to the cleaned container which previously contained the eggs, and then the previous fry container would also be cleaned and refilled with fresh water and set aside for the new spare container for the next day. This rotation did keep the process running smoothly, so if you do want to try something like this, I would recommend you get 3 containers as it kept things as easy as possible. My available space also let me keep the egg and fry container in direct sunlight right on the windowsill. So moving on to day 2, and I performed the first 100% water change for the Medaka eggs. I ended up using my own pipettes which had a larger opening on the end, making it easy to safely suck up the eggs without causing any damage to them. As you can see, the pipettes easily pick the eggs up, allowing me to quickly and easily transfer them between the containers. Now it did take a couple of minutes to move all 21 of the eggs over to the new container, and I did notice that some of them were starting to turn white and cloudy. On day 3 I realised that placing a dark surface beneath the egg container made it a lot easier to spot the eggs. This allowed me to transfer all of the eggs over to the new container in about a minute, saving a lot of time because on day 2 a lot of the time was spent trying to actually find the eggs. Another trick that I worked out is that you can squeeze the pipette when it's underwater to blow water around the container to move any hidden eggs that you can't see, making them a lot easier to see. I also noticed that some of the eggs were starting to develop tiny little eyes, confirming that they were actually fertilised and that the project was progressing well. On day 4 I did another 100% water change for the eggs, but I'm not entirely sure if doing it every day is necessary if I'm honest. Most of the eggs had now developed visible eyes that I could see, indicating that a lot of the eggs were fertilised and the fry inside of them were starting to develop. On day 5 I did notice that 2 of the eggs had basically turned totally white, suggesting that they were either unfertilised or they developed some type of fungal infection. Now this footage was actually recorded back in August here in the UK during a heat wave, and I chose to check the water temperature because it was very hot and I got a reading of 88 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius for the water in front of the window on the windowsill. Now I've seen some Japanese breeders share information about their experiments with temperature ranges, and ideally I wanted to maintain around 25 degrees Celsius. To try and maintain a temperature of around 25 degrees Celsius, I switched over to a Haigen nano heater because it's got a better temperature regulation system, but I also moved the tubs off the windowsill to try and reduce the ambient heat that they were having exposure to. I actually lost the footage from day 6, but according to my notes I just did 100% water change, and this clip is from day 7, and as you can see the eggs were starting to develop some colour, indicating that the fry were continually grown. At the start of day 8 I spotted 2 tiny little fries swimming around, so I netted them up and transferred them over to the fry tub. Each time I passed through the kitchen that day, more fry seemed to be hatching, and by the end of the day I had 16 fry in total, and one by one as I saw them I just moved them over to the fry tub. Instead of using the food that came with the eggs that I wasn't sure what it was, I opted to use some Hikari First Bites as I had some anyway, and I'd seen a lot of other Medaka breeders recommend it. This food is absolutely tiny, making it very easy for the fry to eat it, but it can be difficult to gauge how much food you should add to the tubs. Some breeders do recommend daily water changes for the fry, but I followed the advice of Medaka Momji and some other Japanese breeders who suggest a weekly water change for the fry instead. This is because the fry are a lot more sensitive to water changes than the eggs, so I wanted to keep things as stable as possible. I also decided to remove the heater from the tub as the ambient temperatures at this time of the year were easily enough to maintain a temperature of 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 25 degrees Celsius. So skipping a few days and jumping forward to day 12 as I basically just fed the fry every day and no new fry actually hatched. I noticed that the remaining eggs started to either float around their tub or literally just started to disintegrate like jelly, so I decided to discard them, presuming that they weren't fertilised. Thankfully, all of the fry that had hatched were still thriving, and I managed to count all 16 of them, meaning that none of them have died. Even though the fry were only 4 days old at this point, they were far more active than they were initially, and I could actually see them coming up to the surface to feed. I decided to set up a larger grow-out tank and move the fry over once they were large enough to get to the food and swim around the larger space, so it would be a while before I moved them over. I added a few stems of hornwort to help manage the ammonia build-up from any uneaten food, as well as some floating plants to absorb any toxins in the water to keep it safe. As you can see, this tub has plenty of hiding spots for the fry, allowing them to get away from each other if they wish, and I'd hope this would make an excellent little grout tub for them in the future. So jumping ahead to day 18, and my daily routine basically involved feeding the fry a small amount of food every morning until it was time for the weekly water change. You can see how much algae had accumulated in the tub from the direct sunlight, but I have seen people say that Medaka fry will nibble on algae, which helps get them to actually eat food, get calories into their body and help them with growth. I carefully netted all 16 of the fry up and transferred them over to the tub with fresh water, and then added some fresh food. At only 10 days old, their activity levels had drastically increased again, and I couldn't see them swimming around at speed without issue. So jumping ahead again to day 24, and it was basically more of the same, doing another 100% water change. It's surprising how low maintenance these are, because every day in between the 2 updates I was basically just adding a small pinch of food and leaving the fry to do their thing. Now it might not be obvious in the video clips, but it was actually surprising how quickly these fry were grown, and all 16 of them were still alive and increasing in their confidence swimming around their little tub. So jumping forward again to day 32 this time, as it was time for another water change. By this time it was early September, but it was still quite warm in my area, causing algae to still build up quite quickly. I noticed that placing a sheet of paper under the fry tub made it a lot easier to spot the fries swimming amongst the algae, making it easier to catch them. I also started to tally each fry as I transferred them between the tubs to make sure that they were all accounted for, because I did start to lose count. Again, the fry have grown a lot and they're far more active, and their confidence just keeps building and building and building. Jumping ahead to day 39 for another water change, and I noticed that the fry were growing a lot larger, so I did consider moving them to the bigger tub. Once again, I used the paper method to easily spot the fry, netting them out of their old tub one by one. I did decide to add some water lettuce to their smaller grout tub, and in hindsight I'm not sure why I didn't do this sooner. On day 42, I noticed that the fry were sparring with each other in their little tub, and their increased activity levels made me confident that they could easily handle swimming the length of the larger tub. I netted them all up and transferred them over to the bigger grout tub, and I was happy to see that all 16 fry were still alive. They seemed to adjust well to their larger space, and they were easily swimming around in the new tank, and in hindsight again I could probably have moved them over to the large grout tub a lot sooner. My main concern was that they may not have been able to find the small amounts of food that I was adding to the tank, and it would have made it harder for them to feed, but this hobby is always a learning experience and they had no issues with finding food. And I know I've mentioned this a few times, but it really was amazing to see how much their size had increased and their activity levels had increased in just over a month. Here's a clip from day 45 showing some of the fry sparring with each other. According to some highly experienced Japanese breeders who have their own farms, this behaviour is completely normal and expected, and it's not due to a lack of food or issues with water temperatures or an issue with the male to female ratios, it's just how the fry develop. To be honest, it was quite entertaining just watching them spar with each other for dominance to establish their hierarchy in the grout tub, and I did find myself watching them quite a bit each day. On day 48 I did notice that the fry weren't developing any colour, which made me wonder if I'd been mistakenly sold platinum Medaka eggs or even pearl Medaka eggs, as they are both far more common. Apparently, from what I've seen other people say on Facebook, this kind of mix-up does happen fairly often. On day 53 I performed 100% water change in the larger tub. Now, there was no issues with the actual water parameters, as in ammonia and nitrite levels, but I have read a lot of people say that Medaka fry release a growth stunting hormone, and regular water changes help minimise its effects, but I can't find any solid information on if that's a real thing or not. On day 59 I decided to try the fry with some NT Labs microcrumb food, as it will be their main food as adults. Initially they seemed too preoccupied with sparring each other to even notice that it was dinner time, but I did see a few of them nibbling at it later that evening. Jumping ahead to day 66, and I transferred the fry to their main tank, my 29-gallon planted setup. Since the water parameters in their new tank matched their current water in the tub, there was no need to drip acclimate the fry. The tank had been cycling for about a month, and the filter is easily capable of maintaining safe and stable water parameters. When first added to the tank, the fry immediately dove to the bottom, and I just presumed it was a natural safety response to being introduced to a new environment. About 1 hour later, some of the fry had started to explore their new habitat, but most of them were still at the bottom quarter of the tank. At around 2 months old, they currently resemble platinum or pearl Medaka, very different from the photograph on the eBay listing, so hopefully they'll develop colour in the coming weeks, but to be honest, I'm not that fussed about the colour of them, I still enjoy watching them. By the end of the day, the fry seemed to be settling in well, and they were exploring the rest of their tank without any issues. This is the fry 72 days after hatching, and as you can see, they've settled in nicely to the new tank and they are swimming freely at all levels of the aquarium.